What's up everybody, this is Danny, and if you're in the market for an Android phone right now, this video is probably what you've been waiting for. There are a ton of Android phones out there on the market, but these two are arguably the best out on the market right now. So let's go ahead and compare the LG G4 versus the Samsung Galaxy S6. Let's start it off by taking a look at the build quality and design of these two phones. And if you couldn't tell already, they definitely went in the opposite directions when it comes to build material and the feel in hand. The Galaxy S6 feels ultra premium in your hand due to the metal enclosure and the Gorilla Glass 4 on the front and back, and it's also a more compact device in comparison to the G4, so if you're looking for a more compact design, this could be the one for you. The metal and glass though does pose some problems. It does get pretty greasy and fingerprinty on the back, so it does feel a little bit slippery when it's in your hand, but it's definitely the more premium out of the two. The G4 takes the more traditional plastic approach that they took with the previous LG G3, but it does have a really nice curve on the back and the front, and it has the rear mounted buttons, which I am a fan of. So it does have a very clean design, and the one thing that it definitely wins on is that it's got a removable battery, and it also has micro SD card expansion, which the Samsung Galaxy has neither. So if those are the things that you need, then this comparison is probably already over for you. If you want the G4 to be more premium in your hand though, they do offer a leather option, which is a much nicer feeling back. I wish they would have put this in as standard. The Galaxy S6 has a 5.1-inch Quad HD Super AMOLED display, which looks fantastic by the way, and the compact nature of the Galaxy S6 is much easier to use with just one hand. Even though the G4 has the larger 5.5-inch Quad HD display, I feel like the curve on the back of the G4, it just contours to the hand a little bit better, and even though it's not as good for one-handed use, I just think without a case that the G4 is less slippery in the hand, especially with the leather back. So overall build quality, I will give it to the Samsung Galaxy S6, but everyday feel in the hand, I'll give it to the LG G4. Since they both have Quad HD resolutions, this is a question that I get all the time. Which is the better display? This is a very hard call because they are both phenomenal displays. But the one thing that you will notice with the 5.1-inch Super AMOLED panel on the Galaxy S6 is that it's smaller, so naturally due to the pixel density, things will look just a little bit sharper on there. The G4 features a IPS quantum panel, which they claim meets better color accuracy, meeting the DCI standards, but the one thing that I've noticed the most on here is that it looks pretty close to the AMOLED display. It's got nice and deep contrast, the colors are nice, they are popping, but when it comes to the AMOLED display on the Samsung Galaxy S6, this is the same thing that you would expect from most AMOLED displays, with super dark blacks and nice punchy colors, and it's a little bit warmer on the panel as well. So if I had to give to the display and I had to make a choice, I'd probably give it to the Samsung Galaxy S6 because it also is brighter in direct sunlight. Let me tell you this though, if you're used to using a larger phone, the Galaxy S6 might feel a little bit small to you, so you may want to go with the G4 if you want a bigger display. Software wise, you're going to find a very similar experience. You're going to find their respective skins on top of Android Lollipop. The G4 is running a more recent version with Android 5.1 at this time, while the Galaxy S6 is running 5.0.2. In the end, it really doesn't matter because the core experience is pretty much the same. They both feature multi-window, but it makes a little bit more sense on the G4 since it has a larger display, and I do like the implementation on the Galaxy S6 where you can just multi-window right from the multitasking tray. The Galaxy S6 does feature a little bit more with more motions and gestures and also the fingerprint scanner, and that's probably better for Android M coming in the future with Android Pay, but the G4 does have some very useful automation features here, so you can turn off your Wi-Fi when you're leaving the house or turn it on when you come back, which I really like that. And the home touch buttons, you can configure them just like you could do on the G3. I really like this feature because some people like their back buttons and their home buttons in different positions, so I really like that. When it comes to performance, these are very similar. Now, these chipsets are totally different. The G4 is running the Snapdragon 808 processor, which is a 6-core processor with 3 GB of RAM, and the Galaxy S6 is running an octa-core Exynos processor with 3 GB of RAM as well. They both run very similar. They're pretty snappy on day-to-day performance, but if I had to give the performance overall and the overall snappiness a call, I would give it to the Samsung Galaxy S6. I think it's a little bit better when it comes to stutters and lags. When it comes to the battery life, the LG G4 definitely wins. It has the larger 3000 milliamp hour battery, and I'm getting about 4.5 hours of on-screen time every single day, and I'm getting about 14 hours of use, so very consistent battery. Now when it comes to the Samsung Galaxy S6, it has the smaller battery and it's sealed in, and I'm getting about 3 to 3.5 hours of battery with about 12 hours of use. The S6 does come with wireless charging built in, so that's a huge plus, and both phones do support quick charging, but the G4 does have a removable battery, so you can just buy another battery and you can have another full day's charge. So when it comes to the battery life, the LG G4 definitely wins. Let's get to the most interesting duel, and that is who has the better camera out of these two flagship devices. Let's start by talking about the specs of these two lenses. The LG G4 comes with a 16 megapixel camera with a crazy aperture rating of 1.8, and the Samsung Galaxy S6 also has a 16 megapixel camera with the aperture rating of 1.9. So these two are very similar when it comes to the specs. The G4 has a little bit extra here because it has the laser autofocus carried over from the G3, and it also has a color spectrum sensor, which should give you better colors and more accurate white balance. On the S6, if you double tap the home button, it launches the camera, so that's probably the best shortcut I've ever seen on any device to launch the camera, and the shutter is super quick. The software on the S6 for the camera is much improved over the S5. They congregated all the modes into one area, your slow motion, fast motion, and your selective focus. But the best mode here is your Pro mode, where you can get into your manual focus, your white balance, your ISO, and your exposure. You do not have to use this mode, by the way. The auto mode works perfect, but you have more control with this manual mode, which I like a lot. There are a ton of other features, but I can't go over that due to time constraints, but it does have support for awesome 4K video, and it does have effects that are live, so you can see the effect happen and then take a picture, so I think some of you might like that. The G4 also has a camera shortcut. If you just double tap the volume down button, it will open the camera app, but by default it takes a picture, so make sure you turn that off in the settings if you don't like that. The G4 camera app is also extremely simple, just one grid here of options, and you can go into the settings here and change your aspect ratio of your camera, and also you can change the video settings here all the way up to 4K video. Even though both of these phones have manual modes, the G4 is definitely the most impressive. I mean, it has an auto exposure lock, you can go into the shutter speed and change that as well, go into your ISO, you have manual focus, white balance changes. I mean, this thing even has a histogram, and what's awesome about this is you can just change the color temperature right on the manual mode, so you can get your perfect shot if you want with this. This is very impressive. Specs are specs, but the best thing to do is to just go out and take a bunch of photos with these two phones, and that's exactly what I did. So I'm going to show you the shots with the Samsung Galaxy S6, and then I'm going to put them side by side with the same shots that I took with the LG G4. This is probably the hardest camera comparison that I've ever had to do because both of these cameras are absolutely fantastic. So if you take a look at the GS6 picture, it looks like it's a little bit more contrasty and it does a much better job with exposure. Take a look at the sky behind it. When it comes to colors, the Galaxy S6 tends to oversaturate the colors, where the LG G4 is a flatter profile, so the colors tend to be a little bit more accurate. I mean, look at this rose here, it's very saturated, where the G4 it's a lot flatter and gets the more accurate color out of the two. So the color spectrum sensor is working well. The tendency of the Galaxy S6 is more contrast, where the LG G4 tends to not be as high contrast when it comes to the shots. But here with the Galaxy S6 and the G4, this shot ended up being a little bit more contrasty than the other, so it was a little bit mixed up. I was getting some mixed results. So with the Galaxy S6 and the G4, here is a more dynamic shot, and I was finding that with the high dynamic range, the Galaxy S6, it tended to be more natural than the G4's HDR, but it does tend to bring out a little bit more detail with the G4 HDR. So I'm not sure which one looks better because the Galaxy S6 looks a little bit more natural. But the problem that I saw with the G4 is that it tends to overexpose, especially in macro shots. Look at this bench, for example. The S6 does a great job of exposing the foreground and background, while the G4 tends to just overexpose everything in that shot. The S6 also tends to overexpose in macro mode, but the G4 also does that and changes the color temperature to a more cool color temperature. But this is also mixed. Look at the S6 here and the G4. The G4 now is warmer when it goes to the macro mode. So I'm getting a lot of mixed results here. But I do prefer the look of the S6, I think, overall when it comes to these landscape shots. They're a little bit more contrasty and they just look more real to life. Now the S6 versus the G4 in low light conditions, I feel that the G4 tends to overexpose with this 1.8 aperture, and I think the GS6 actually looks a little bit more natural when it comes to low light. But once again, I'm getting mixed results, especially when it comes to color. It just depends on the shot that you take, because the Galaxy S6 here tends to be flatter without any saturation, where the G4 tends to take a more saturated and better colors when it comes to the low light. So both of these cameras are fantastic in low light conditions. It's very hard to tell which one is actually a little bit better, but here the Galaxy S6, I think it looks a little bit more natural, where the G4 tends to expose a little bit more, but ends up bringing out a little bit more detail in low light. But if you look closely, the G4's image is definitely noisier. So I hope you can see the dilemma that I'm having, especially when I was testing these two cameras. They are both fantastic cameras and you will not be disappointed in either one of them, but it really has to do with your preference. But if I had to make a call, I would say that the Galaxy S6 takes the more consistent pictures when it comes to just day-to-day pictures, and if you were to congregate all the pictures together, I say the S6 takes better images, because here on the G4, the colors are off and the color spectrum sensor does not work all of the time. And for me, I think the S6 takes a little bit more natural looking pictures than the G4. So if I had to call it, I'd say S6. But when it comes to the optical image stabilization, they both have it. But if you look at the GS6, it does a much better job. The G4 is way aggressive when it comes to the optical image stabilization, and the 4K video I think is noticeably better on the GS6. The G4's 4K video has a lower bit rate, it's got more artifacting. Even though it's sharp, the S6 is much better. When it comes to the front-facing camera, the Galaxy S6 is wider, but the LG G4's 8 megapixel camera is definitely sharper, and I think it takes the better image. So I think this is one of the best front-facing cameras that I've seen in terms of image quality, so that goes to the G4. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. So if you care about my opinion at all, this is a very tough one, but if I had to call it, I think that if I preferred a phone, it'd probably be the GS6. But I think overall, if you look at the grand aspect of things, because there's advantages and disadvantages to both of these phones, I think the G4 is probably the better all-around phone. And let me tell you why. Even though that the G4 is missing some things, I think it has the most versatility and hits a lot of the check marks that a lot of people are looking for in an Android phone today. It has a beautiful display, it's got one of the best cameras on the market right now, it's got some great battery life, a removable battery at that, and a micro SD card expansion slot, and that is a dying breed in that combination in the Android space today. Let's just end it like this. If you get either of these phones, you'll be extremely happy, but just looking at all things, I say the G4 is probably the better phone universally. So make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure you give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching guys, and I will see you in the next one.